The Gluttons, Part 3. The fire burned to ash, and the letter with it. Lucien didn't watch the embers drift into the canopy above. His eyes were fixed downward, on the ring of scorched soil that had formed around him. A perfect circle. Blackened grass and curling earth, residue left behind by something that had touched him in the clearing. Something not divine, not infernal, not even necrotic. Something older. When he returned to camp, the others had noticed. Mara raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Sylvi's eyes flicked to the burned hem of his coat and narrowed. Brannock only grunted and tossed a log on the fire so hard it cracked in two. "We're being followed," Brannock said after a while. Lucien looked up. "Who?" "Don't know. But it's not a man. I can smell it. Like dry air and dust and wet stone. Like a tomb," Sylvi finished. Her voice barely rose above the wind. "No footprints," she added. "But twice today, I saw trees bend in the wrong direction. Like something walked past without touching the ground." Lucien stared into the fire. "It's him," he said finally. Mara shifted beside him. The word hung in the air like rot. "The thing from the stone circle?" she asked. Lucien nodded once. "The one that spoke through me." The next town wasn't marked on any map. They reached it by accident, or fate. A village built around a dried lakebed, its houses sunken and listing, as if the earth itself had started to forget it existed. The people there didn't speak when they arrived. They only stared, hollow-eyed, from behind curtains. Lucien entered the tavern with a hood drawn. Mara followed, dragging her fingertips along the dusty countertop. The barkeep offered them stale mead and didn't ask for coin. He only muttered, "They said you'd come." Sylvi didn't enter the tavern at all. She wandered the town perimeter instead, tracing the symbols carved into trees, glyphs of warning, of sealing, of desperation. Brannock went to the lakebed. He found bones. Hundreds. Small ones. Children. Not freshly killed, not ancient. Just left. Forgotten in the dirt like discarded fruit pits. Some still had shoes on. He didn't tell the others. That night, Mara dreamt. She stood at the altar of a chapel long buried, its stone walls carved with stories in a language that bled as you read it. The pews were filled with corpses, dressed in finery, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent agony. In front of her stood Lucien. But it wasn't Lucien. His face was his, but too perfect. His eyes glowed with a light that pulsed like a second heartbeat. He held out his hand. "You are not judged," he said. "You are remembered." She reached for him, and woke up gasping, her fingertips burning. On her palm, a brand, a spiral made of dripping thorns. They left the village at dawn. The villagers didn't stop them. Didn't speak. They only gathered at the edge of the road and watched them go. One child held a sign. It was written in blood. "We forgive you. Now run." On the third night, the thing found them. It came not as a beast or a man, but as a gap, a wound torn into the world around them. One moment, the trees stood as they always had. The next, there was a void between them. No trees, no stars, no wind. Just blankness. Like a mouth. And something stepped through. It wasn't large. It didn't need to be. Its body was long and thin, all black limbs and coiling shadow. Its head was a mass of antlers, and at its center, a mirror. The Gluttons saw themselves in it, fanged, blood-soaked, beautiful. Then they blinked, and saw other versions. Lucien as a beast, wild and snarling, chained to a throne of flesh. Mara nailed to a stage, her tongue missing, her music stolen. Sylvi suspended upside down in a web of blades, smiling with someone else's mouth. Brannock split open, hollowed out, laughing. None of them moved. The creature's voice was not sound, it was thought. It folded into them like memory. "You are echoes," it whispered. "Louder than the world allows. You drain. You consume. You forget. But I remember." Lucien stepped forward. "Who are you?" The mirror shimmered. For a moment, his own face looked back at him, and then melted into ash. "You called me. When you fed. When you broke the balance. I am the consequence." The Gluttons attacked. Steel met fog. Magic bent. Time stuttered. Brannock's blade passed through the creature's chest without resistance. Mara sang a note that silenced the world for miles. Sylvie struck from behind, driving Silver into a neck that wasn't there. It laughed. And with a whisper, it vanished. In the days that followed, nothing grew near them. Crops withered as they passed. Water turned to brine. Travelers they met on the road died in their sleep with expressions of ecstasy, drained not of blood, but of being. And still they fed. They couldn't stop. Not because they wanted to, but because the world was feeding them back. Lucien stood one night beneath a ruined chapel, tracing the lines of the spiral symbol carved into the altar. Mara approached, her eyes darker than night. "You're going to bring it here again." "It never left," Lucien said. "It's inside us now. Then we need to do something." Lucien nodded. "We need to find where it came from." "Where?" He looked at her. And for the first time in centuries, he didn't smile. "We go back." Mara blinked. "To where?" Lucien turned to the altar, placed his hand on the symbol. "To the first thirst." They left Ravenhold in silence. The temple still smoldered behind them, a monument to what they'd undone. The streets were empty now. Freed cultists either fled or turned their blades on themselves when the spell broke. The sky above bore streaks of dawnlight pushing through the smoke, but it was not a sunrise of peace. It was a warning. Lucien walked with a limp. The final confrontation had taken more than blood, it had taken memory. As he staggered along the outer road, he found that certain names had left him. Faces of old friends, moments of first hunger. Mara walked close by, watching him with eyes neither soft nor distant. She knew the cost. Brannock held the rear, his broad form slouched and knuckles scabbed. Every few steps, he looked over his shoulder. Not from fear. From habit. Ravenhold had awakened something in him, a sense that every ending carried an echo. Sylvie walked alone. A step apart from the others, eyes forward, jaw clenched. She had stopped writing names. The book was full. There were no more pages. They came to a ridge overlooking a valley once marked on maps as Valen's Hollow. A quiet farming stretch. It no longer existed. Blackened fields stretched to the horizon. Trees withered. Every well had dried, leaving mouths open in the land like thirsting corpses. Here, the old thirst had passed through centuries ago. It had left its mark. But in the center stood something new. A tree. Tall. Black. Leafless. Rooted in bones. They approached. Lucien paused. This wasn't here before. Mara sniffed the air. "It's bleeding." Indeed, the bark oozed a dark resin that reeked of copper and old wine. 1,000 insects crawled along its trunk, blind and slow. Brannock reached out and touched it. The tree screamed. A wave of psychic energy rolled outward. Not pain. Not anger. Recognition. Each of the Gluttons staggered. Images burst into their minds, visions of places they'd never been, people they'd never met, horrors they'd never committed. A web of potential lives. It wasn't just feeding memories, it was creating them. Lucien fell to one knee. "I know this place," he whispered. Sylvie stared up at the branches. "It's not a tree. It's a vessel." Mara's eyes darkened. "Someone planted it." They began digging. Brannock used his hands. Clawed through the bones and dry roots. After an hour, his fingers hit something harder than earth. A box. Stone. Sealed in silver. Covered in glyphs no one had seen in living memory. Lucien reached down. His blood fell on the seal. The box opened. Inside was a heart. Not beating. Not human. but unmistakably alive. Another one, Sylvie said. Lucien shook his head. No. This one's different. He leaned in, and the heart pulsed. Not the origin, he said. A seed. Mara stepped back. Someone's trying to grow a new god. Lucien nodded. Brannock grunted. Then we burn it. He raised his blade, but Lucien stopped him. Wait. If there's one seed, there are more. Sylvie nodded grimly. 100 trees. 1,000. Lucien looked around. The valley stretched far, blackened and dead. We end it here. But we start watching. Hunting. Mara raised a brow. You're suggesting we become what they feared? Lucien stood fully now, pain in his bones but fire in his voice. No. I'm suggesting we become what we were never allowed to be. Keepers. Brannock lowered his blade. Sylvie said nothing, but she stepped beside Lucien. Together, they carried the heart to the peak above the valley. There, Mara sang. A song not of death, but of endings. Of stillness. Of sleep. And they buried it beneath stone and silence. Then they vanished into the wind. The Gluttons, once devourers of worlds, now walked as watchers. Not heroes. Not monsters. Just 4 who had been unmade, who now walked to keep others from making the same mistake. But far to the north, in a city that had never been mapped, a child was dreaming of a mirror. And the thirst returned. Epilogue, the dream and the flame. The city was called Ilthrin's Hollow by the few who knew it existed. Built beneath the ice shelf of the northern crown, its spires rose like broken teeth from the glacier's mouth. Beneath it, tunnels carved by heat and breath wound endlessly. In the highest chamber of the deepest spire, a child lay in bed, eyes open, watching the ceiling. He did not blink. In his dream, he walked corridors lined with mirrors. In each, a version of himself, a king, a god, a beast, a corpse. In one, he was Lucien. In another, he was the tree. When he woke, his pillow was soaked with blood. The heart had begun to beat again. A tremor passed beneath the continent. Somewhere, a forgotten god stirred in its grave. And far away, Lucien opened his eyes in the dark. He felt it. They all did. The Gluttons, scattered now, in separate corners of the world, felt the call. It was no longer a thirst. It was a challenge. And none of them could resist it. The story would not end. But it would change. They would change it. Together, or alone. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like and comment for more. Have a good day, and until next time, adventurer.